He had spent a lifetime in control of the stage, of his image, of every room he ever walked into, but near the end there was something different about Frank Sinatra. His voice was slower, his eyes softer, and the words he chose carried the weight of decades of silence. For over 50 years, the world had whispered about his bond with Sammy Davis Jr., the man who stood beside him through fame, scandal, and a country divided by color, and when Sinatra finally spoke, what he said wasn't a confession or denial. It was something far deeper, a truth only he and Sammy ever fully understood. The beginning, Detroit, 1941. It began in 1941 in a backstage room of the Michigan Theater in Detroit. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, laughter, and the hum of anticipation. Frank Sinatra, then 25, was already the golden boy of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, a rising star whose voice could melt hearts and silence rooms. He had yet to become the chairman of the board, but his presence already carried that quiet authority, the kind that made people turn when he walked by. That night, he wasn't the only act. Sharing the stage was a small black vaudeville group called the Wilmaston Trio featuring a 16-year-old prodigy named Sammy Davis Jr. The trio had been touring endlessly, small towns, smoky bars, and second-rate theaters that barely paid enough to eat. Sammy had been performing since he was 3 years old, dancing beside his father Sammy Davis Sr. and his uncle Will Maston. There was no childhood, no normally, just the stage lights, train rides, and applause that faded as quickly as it came. When Sinatra entered the break room during intermission, he found the young Sammy sitting alone eating a sandwich. It wasn't a dramatic encounter, no grand introduction, just a brief human moment between two men on opposite ends of fame and privilege. Sinatra, already admired by white America, extended the simplest gesture that night. He sat down and talked. For Sammy, it was unforgettable. He later said that Sinatra treated him like a man, not like a performer, not like a black kid from Harlem, just a man. That distinction mattered in 1941. America was still a country where segregation dictated where you could eat, sleep, or even stand. Hotels, restaurants, and theaters had separate entrances labeled colored. To most white stars of the time, sharing a table or conversation with a black performer was career suicide. Sinatra did it without hesitation. Sammy had been a fan long before that meeting. In fact, he carried a scrapbook filled with Sinatra's newspaper clippings, showing them proudly to his grandmother. What he admired wasn't just Sinatra's fame or voice, it was his freedom. Sinatra could command a stage, speak his mind, and walk through any door without question. For a young black artist in a segregated America, that kind of freedom wasn't just admirable, it was unthinkable. 3 years later, when Sammy was drafted into the U.S. Army, the lessons of that meeting stayed with him. Life in uniform didn't bring equality, it brought humiliation. He was beaten, called slurs, and once forced to paint his face white during a military skit to entertain the white soldiers. Yet somehow he turned pain into performance. He joined an entertainment unit using humor and song to survive. It was during those lonely nights that Sammy watched and rewatched The House I Live In, a 1945 short film starring Frank Sinatra. In it, Sinatra defends a young Jewish boy from bullies, delivering a message of unity that America belonged to everyone, regardless of race or religion. The film's message was revolutionary for its time, and for Sammy, it felt personal. It was as if Sinatra was speaking directly to him, reminding him that the dream of equality wasn't just fantasy. When he returned from the army in 1945, battered but unbroken, Sammy made a silent promise to himself to follow the path Sinatra had shown him, one of resilience, dignity, and defiance. He didn't know it yet, but that chance meeting in Detroit would define both their lives. One had the voice that America worshipped, the other had the rhythm it needed to hear. Together, they would change the rules of what friendship and loyalty could look like in a divided world. Brotherhood in a divided America. By 1947, Frank Sinatra's fame had reached a fever pitch. He was no longer just the crooner from Hoboken, he was the voice. Women screamed his name outside theaters and record executives bowed to his demands. In that same year, he was invited to headline at New York's legendary Capitol Theater, one of the most prestigious stages in America. When asked who he wanted as his opening act, Sinatra didn't hesitate, he said, the Will Maston Trio. The theater managers were confused. The Will Maston Trio was a small black vaudeville group, talented, yes, but unknown to white audiences. Sinatra didn't care. He wanted Sammy Davis Jr. on that stage, and he demanded that the trio be paid 5 times their usual fee. The theater balked, but Sinatra's word was law. That night, Sammy walked onto the stage in front of a mostly white audience. The lights were blinding, the silence heavy, but within minutes, his dance steps and effortless charm electrified the room. He ended his performance to thunderous applause. When he left the stage, Sinatra greeted him with a grin and said, "I told them you'd kill it." For Sammy, that moment wasn't just applause, it was validation. A white superstar had not only believed in him, but risked his own reputation to make it happen. From that day forward, a bond began to grow, one that would cross the unspoken boundaries of race, class, and fame. Sinatra saw in Sammy a reflection of himself, the hunger, the perfectionism, the need to be seen and respected. But Sammy's struggle was far harder. Even at the height of his talent, America still saw his skin color before it saw his brilliance. In Las Vegas, the hypocrisy was brutal. Black performers like Sammy could sing on the biggest stages, but when the show ended, they were forced to sleep outside city limits or in rundown colored-only motel. They couldn't eat in the restaurants they performed in or swim in the same hotel pools as white guests. It was a city built on glamour and segregation. Frank Sinatra refused to accept it. During one tour, when management at the Sands Hotel tried to deny Sammy a room, Sinatra snapped. He threatened to cancel his performance and walk out. "If he can't stay here, neither will I," he told them. The hotel caved. That single act became a turning point in Las Vegas history. Word spread quickly. If Sinatra was playing, racism wasn't welcome. But beneath that loyalty lay a complicated truth. For all of Sinatra's influence, the power dynamic between them was impossible to ignore. Sinatra was the savior, the gatekeeper, the man whose word carried weight in boardrooms and nightclubs. Sammy, despite his extraordinary talent, remained the man who needed Sinatra. He adored Frank, but also felt the invisible wall that separated them, the reminder that even friendship had limits in America's racial hierarchy. And yet, when tragedy struck, Sinatra's care went beyond words. In 1954, Sammy was driving late one night on Route 66 when his car crashed head-on into another vehicle. He survived, but his left eye was shattered. When he woke up in the hospital, Sinatra was there. He paid every bill, sent his own doctor, and made sure no expense was spared. He even invited Sammy to recover at his Palm Springs home. In later interviews, Sammy said something that captured their unspoken bond. "When I lost my eye, the first place I went was Frank's house because I had nowhere else to go." To Sinatra, it was instinct. To Sammy, it was salvation. Their relationship was becoming something deeper, not just friendship, but family forged through loyalty, pain, and an unspoken understanding that the world outside that bond would never truly understand. It was here, in those quiet months after the accident, that the foundation of their brotherhood solidified. They had seen the ugliest sides of fame, racism, and loss, and though they came from different worlds, each man had found something rare in the other, someone who didn't just share the stage, but shared the fight. The Rat Pack era and the cracks beneath the surface. By the late 1950s, Sinatra and Davis were part of the Rat Pack along with Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. They were untouchable, the kings of Las Vegas, a mix of charm, comedy, and chaos that redefined show business. On stage, they drank, joked, and made the audience feel like they were part of a private party, but behind the laughter was something darker. Sammy became the target of endless racial jokes: Smokey, Charlie, Spade. It was all done publicly under the spotlight, and the audience roared with laughter. To them, it was comedy. To Sammy, it was survival. He played along, smiling, laughing, pretending it didn't sting, but after the curtain closed, the jokes lingered. Civil rights activists began criticizing him, calling him Uncle Tom for tolerating humiliation from white peers. They accused him of being complicit, of playing the clown for acceptance. Sinatra never apologized for the jokes, but he always defended Sammy. He would say, "If you think those jokes mean I don't love him, you don't know me." Still, power remained uneven. When Sammy publicly criticized Sinatra on a radio show in 1959, calling him rude and temperamental, Sinatra erupted. He called him names, some of which witnesses later admitted were racially charged. Davis was cut from Sinatra's film, Never So Few. For months, Sinatra blacklisted him from projects. Only after Dean Martin intervened did Sinatra let him back in for Ocean's 11. Their relationship survived, but it was never quite the same. They learned to keep their conflicts private. On stage, they were inseparable; off stage, they navigated a quiet imbalance. Love mixed with resentment, loyalty shadowed by control, loyalty, and the unspoken rumors. By the early 1960s, the world was changing. Sinatra and Davis stood together at civil rights benefits, raising money for Martin Luther King Jr. at Carnegie Hall. They pressured Las Vegas casinos to end segregation and demanded equal pay for black artists. Their alliance was both moral and personal, but it also fueled rumors. Audiences noticed the way Sinatra looked at Davis, the way they embraced the words they whispered on stage. "Me and My Shadow," their duet, wasn't just a song, it felt like a declaration. Sinatra, the white superstar, and Davis, the black entertainer, singing side by side about being inseparable. It was powerful, intimate, and for some unsettling. Whispers began to spread. Were they more than friends? In an era where masculinity and image ruled Hollywood, even a hint of something deeper was scandalous. The tabloids hinted, the insiders speculated, but neither man ever spoke about it. Sinatra brushed off questions with his signature smirk. Davis said nothing. To both, love, whether brotherly or something else, wasn't meant to be explained to people who hadn't lived it. Still, the rumors persisted. Some said Sinatra's fierce protection of Sammy went beyond friendship, others said Davis's devotion was worship, but in truth, what tied them together wasn't romance or fame, it was survival. Two men, both outsiders in their own way, clinging to each other in a world that demanded masks, politics, betrayal, and redemption. In 1960, when John F. Kennedy ran for president, Sinatra became one of his loudest supporters, rallying Hollywood behind him. He wanted Sammy at the inauguration standing beside him, but when Davis married white Swedish actress May Britt, Kennedy's team withdrew the invitation. They feared a photo of a black man with a white wife would alienate Southern voters. Sinatra was furious, but he stayed silent publicly, privately. He never forgave the Kennedys. Sammy was devastated. "I felt like I helped build a house and was told I couldn't come inside," he said later. It was Sinatra who comforted him, reminding him that politics came and went, but loyalty lasted, that loyalty endured through tragedy. In 1963, when Sinatra's son was kidnapped, Sammy was among the first to show up. When Davis faced bankruptcy and drug addiction, Sinatra sent money, arranged shows, and called in favors to keep him working. But by the 1970s, both men were aging and drifting. Sinatra had shifted politically, supporting Republicans and withdrawing from without second.